The night began with the kind of restless energy that only Saturday could bring. Ethan stood by the window of his downtown Seattle apartment, watching the drizzle fall over the glowing streets. It had been a long week, endless meetings, unfinished projects, and a silence in his apartment that grew heavier with every passing evening. His longtime girlfriend, Laura, was out of town visiting her parents, and he hadn't realized how lonely he'd become until that moment. His phone buzzed. It was Ryan, his best friend since college. "You're not staying in tonight, are you?" Ryan asked, his tone already carrying that familiar spark. Ethan laughed softly. "I wasn't planning to go anywhere." Ryan chuckled. "Well, change your plan. There's a new place on Fifth Live Band. Good crowd. You need to get out, man." Ethan hesitated for a moment. He wasn't in the mood for noise or crowds, but something in Ryan's voice, that stubborn cheerfulness, made him give in. "Fine," he said, "but you're buying the first round." By 9, they were inside the Ember Room, a modern club glowing with warm lights and low music. It wasn't wild or chaotic. It was relaxed, filled with people who came to unwind rather than lose control. Ethan instantly felt lighter. Ryan, on the other hand, looked like he was already home, greeting the bartender, nodding at strangers, flashing that easy smile that made everyone want to talk to him. They grabbed a corner table, and soon enough, 2 women caught Ryan's attention, Claire and Sophie, sitting across the room laughing over a shared drink. Claire had a calm confidence about her, the kind of woman who didn't need attention but naturally drew it. Sophie was her opposite, bright, full of laughter, her eyes alive with curiosity. Ryan leaned toward Ethan. "All right, my friend. Tonight, we're not talking about work or relationships. Just people. Just fun." Ethan shook his head, smiling. "You're impossible." But minutes later, Ryan was already walking toward the women, introducing himself with effortless charm. Ethan followed reluctantly, but politely. The introductions were simple, unforced. Claire smiled warmly at Ethan when they shook hands. "You look like someone who'd rather be at a quiet cafe than a loud club," she said. He laughed. "You're not wrong." That broke the ice. The 4 of them found themselves sharing a booth, talking about everything: favorite movies, travel stories, the strange weather, and the way Seattle never quite decided if it wanted to be cold or warm. There was no flirting at first, no tension, just connection, easy, human, real dot. As the night stretched on, the music changed to something slower. The noise around them blurred and conversations grew softer. Ethan noticed Ryan and Sophie laughing together about something while Claire sipped her drink, glancing around thoughtfully. She seemed like someone with stories she didn't often tell. "Do you come here often?" Ethan asked, half teasing. She smiled. "That's such a classic line." "I didn't mean it that way," he said quickly, laughing. "I'm just trying to figure out if this is your kind of place." "It's not," she admitted. "But Sophie dragged me here. Said I needed to stop hiding behind work." "That makes 2 of us," Ethan said quietly. Their eyes met for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but understanding. 2 people feeling the same quiet emptiness, masked by polite smiles. Ryan returned, setting down fresh drinks. "We're heading to Ethan's place after this," he announced. "The club's closing soon, and apparently I'm not ready for the night to end." Claire raised an eyebrow at Ethan. "Is that your invitation or his?" "His idea," Ethan said quickly. "But I've got coffee and it's warmer there than out here." They all laughed, and 20 minutes later, the 4 of them were walking through the misty streets toward Ethan's apartment. The city felt alive, taxis rushing past, the hum of music fading behind them, the scent of rain in the air. It wasn't about romance or intentions. It was just one of those nights that felt suspended between choices and chances. Inside Ethan's apartment, things stayed light. They played music, told stories, argued about which decade had the best songs. Ryan and Sophie sang along to an old tune, laughing so loudly that even Ethan couldn't help but join in. Claire sat beside him on the couch, quiet but content, her laughter soft and rare. like she was still learning how to let herself enjoy the moment at one point. The lights dimmed when the playlist switched to a slower song. Sophie danced in the middle of the room, pulling Ryan with her. They were laughing, not serious, just moving to the rhythm. Ethan and Claire watched them, both smiling. "You two make it look easy," Claire said. "They make everything look easy," Ethan replied. "Ryan's the kind of guy who never overthinks." Claire glanced at him. "And you?" He thought for a second. "I overthink everything." She smiled faintly. "I can tell." There was no flirtation in her tone, just honesty. But it made Ethan pause. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. The air between them felt charged, not romantic exactly, but meaningful, like two people standing at the edge of something neither of them planned for. The night grew later. Ryan and Sophie were still laughing, sitting close on the floor now, surrounded by half-empty cups of coffee. Ethan caught Ryan's eye once, and Ryan grinned, that mischievous grin that always said, "Trust me, I've got this." Ethan rolled his eyes, smiling back. Claire stood up and walked toward the balcony. Ethan followed. The city stretched before them, the skyline glittering, the streets glistening from the rain. She leaned against the railing, her voice low. "You ever feel like you're living the same day over and over?" "All the time," Ethan said. "Every morning feels like a copy of the one before." She turned to him. "Then maybe that's why nights like this matter." He didn't know what to say to that. Her words lingered in the air, soft but sharp. He realized she wasn't talking about fun. She was talking about freedom, about feeling alive again. Inside, Ryan called out, "Hey, you two?" "Don't go philosophical on us out there," Claire laughed, shaking her head. "He's got good timing." Kay went back in, and the atmosphere shifted again, lighter, playful. But under the laughter, something had changed. Ethan felt it, and from the way Claire avoided his eyes afterward, he knew she did too. It was past 2 when they finally decided to call it a night. Ryan offered to call a ride for Claire and Sophie, but Claire insisted they'd walk. The rain had stopped, and the city air felt fresh again at the door. Sophie hugged Ethan. "You're quieter than your friend," she teased. "But you've got good music." Claire smiled, saying softly, "Thanks for the coffee and the company." Ethan nodded. "Anytime." When the door closed behind them, the silence in the apartment felt heavy. Ryan turned to him with that knowing look. "You like her," he said simply. Ethan frowned. "I just met her." "Doesn't matter." "You like her." He didn't answer. Ryan laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Relax, man. It's just a night. They're cool people, that's all." But as Ethan lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake Claire's words from his mind. Maybe that's why nights like this matter. He didn't know what she truly meant, but something deep inside him had stirred a quiet longing for something he couldn't name. Not romance, not attraction, but a reminder of how it felt to be seen and understood without explanation. The city outside was still awake. Sirens echoing faintly in the distance, the smell of rain lingering in the air. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to convince himself it was nothing, just a friendly night. A few laughs, nothing more. But deep down, he knew something had begun. Something small, fragile, and dangerous in its simplicity. It wasn't love, and it wasn't betrayal. It was a moment, the kind that sneaks into your life quietly and changes everything without asking for permission. And though he didn't know it yet, that one night would be the beginning of a story he'd remember for the rest of his life. A story about choices, friendship, and the thin line between what's right and what feels real. The clock ticked past 3. The rain started again. And in that stillness, Ethan realized that life had just taken a turn, one he wasn't ready for, but one he could never forget. Days turned into weeks, but that one night at the Ember Room stayed in Ethan's mind like a song he couldn't stop replaying. It wasn't about Claire exactly, but about how alive he had felt that evening. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd laughed like that or felt seen. Back at work, life returned to its rhythm. Emails, deadlines, polite conversations with Laura over the phone. She was still away, helping her mother recover from surgery. And though Ethan cared deeply for her, every call felt shorter, colder. Ryan, as always, was the one who kept things moving. "Hey," he said one afternoon. "Claire and Sophie are having dinner downtown tonight. You in?" Ethan paused before answering. "I don't know, man. It's been a long week." Ryan chuckled. "You said that last week too. Come on. You need a break." By the time they reached the small restaurant, the same easy energy from the club returned. Claire greeted Ethan with a smile that felt warm and familiar, while Sophie pulled Ryan into another round of laughter before the appetizers even arrived. It was supposed to be just dinner among new friends, but something had shifted. The conversation had a deeper tone now, less small talk, more honesty. Ethan found himself talking about his work, how he felt trapped in a cycle of doing things that didn't matter anymore. Claire listened quietly, not interrupting, just nodding, her eyes full of understanding. "I know that feeling," she said softly. "You wake up one day and realize you're living someone else's plan." That sentence hit him hard. He didn't say it, but it was true. He had stopped chasing his own dreams long ago. Laura was practical, organized, steady. He loved her for that, but sometimes he wondered if stability had replaced excitement. Meanwhile, Ryan and Sophie were the opposite. They were playful, teasing each other nonstop. Ryan had always been the charming one, but with Sophie, he seemed genuinely happy. Ethan noticed it the way Ryan looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Dinner ended late, and when they stepped outside, the city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. Claire pulled her coat tighter. "You ever notice how everything feels different at night?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's when we start listening to ourselves." She laughed softly. "Maybe." It wasn't flirting. It was connection, quiet, real, and dangerously easy. Over the next month, the four of them kept meeting casual dinners, movie nights, coffee after work. It wasn't planned, just something that kept happening. They shared stories about their pasts, about the choices that shaped them. Each time they met, Ethan felt both closer and more conflicted. Laura had returned by then, but something between them felt off. She noticed it too. "You seem distracted lately," she said one night while they watched a show together. Ethan forced a smile. "Just work." But she didn't look convinced. That same week, Ryan invited him to a small get-together at his place. When Ethan arrived, Claire and Sophie were already there. Ryan and Sophie were sitting close, laughing at something on Ryan's phone. Claire sat by the window, looking lost in thought. Ethan walked over. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, just tired. It's been one of those weeks." He sat beside her, and for a while they said nothing. Then she spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder how people fall out of love?" Ethan looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I think it happens slowly," he said, "like sand slipping through your hands." She sighed. "Yeah, that's exactly how it feels." Something about the sadness in her voice made him ache. They didn't talk about it further, but that brief exchange hung in the air. It's unspoken yet powerful. The evening continued with laughter and games. But Ethan felt the weight of something building inside him. Later, when Claire said goodbye, her hand brushed against his. It wasn't intentional, but it wasn't entirely accidental either. The touch was brief, but it stayed with him the whole drive home. That night, Ethan lay awake again. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Thanks for tonight." It felt good to just talk. He replied before thinking, "Same here. You always make things feel lighter." No emojis, no hidden meaning. But the conversation didn't stop there. Over the next few days, they texted often. Simple things at first, work complaints, weekend plans, song recommendations. But slowly, their messages grew deeper. They talked about fear, about growing older, about wanting more from life. It wasn't romantic, but it was emotional, too emotional for two people who weren't supposed to be that close. Ryan had his own story unfolding. His connection with Sophie was stronger by the day. They spent hours together, cooking, hiking, just being around each other. Ryan told Ethan one night, "She's different, man. She actually listens. Feels like I can breathe again." Ethan smiled, but he couldn't ignore the irony. Both of them were walking a thin line between happiness and guilt. Then came the evening that changed everything. They met again for dinner at Ethan's place. Same for people, same easy laughter. But beneath the surface, emotions were tangled. Ryan and Sophie sat close, sharing jokes only they understood. Claire sat beside Ethan, her laughter quieter this time, her eyes holding a sadness he couldn't name. After dinner, Sophie and Ryan stepped onto the balcony. Ethan and Claire stayed behind, clearing the table. The silence between them felt heavier than before. Claire spoke first. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending?" He looked up. "Pretending about what?" "About being happy," she said softly. "About being okay with the life you chose." Ethan set down the plates and leaned against the counter. "Every day." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." For a long time, neither said anything. The city lights flickered through the window, and somewhere outside a siren wailed faintly. It was a quiet, fragile moment, one that neither wanted nor expected, yet both felt pulled toward. When Ryan and Sophie came back inside, the mood shifted instantly. Sophie was glowing, laughing, full of energy. Claire smiled, but Ethan could tell her heart was somewhere else. They all said goodnight soon after, but as Claire left, she looked at Ethan one last time, a look that said everything they couldn't. Days turned into silence. Ethan didn't text her. She didn't text him, but the absence felt heavier than the connection ever had. He tried to focus on Laura, on work, on anything that made sense, but nothing did. One afternoon, he ran into Ryan downtown. They grabbed coffee, and as they sat outside watching people pass by, Ryan said quietly, "You've been quiet lately." Ethan shrugged. "Just tired." Ryan studied him for a moment. "You know, Sophie asked about you and Claire the other day." Ethan's heart skipped. "What about us?" Ryan smirked. "Nothing dramatic. She just said Claire's been distant too." He paused. "You two didn't know," Ethan interrupted quickly. "Nothing happened." Ryan nodded, but his expression said he didn't quite believe it. "Sometimes it doesn't have to happen for it to matter," Quay said softly. That sentence stayed with Ethan for days. A week later, he finally texted Claire again. "Hope you're okay," she replied hours later. "I'm fine. Just trying to stay away from things that make life complicated." He read it 3 times. There was no anger in her words, just honesty. He typed a reply, then deleted it. Some truths didn't need to be said. Ryan's relationship with Sophie kept growing, but even he began to sense the cracks underneath. "It's weird," he told Ethan one night. "The closer I get to her, the more I realize how far I drifted from who I used to be." They sat in silence after that. Neither wanted to admit it, but both knew they were chasing something fleeting, a feeling, a memory, a spark that had nothing to do with the people around them and everything to do with what was missing inside. Then, out of nowhere, Claire sent one last message. "Ethan, you're a good man, but sometimes the right people meet at the wrong time. Take care of her. Laura deserves your heart." He stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't dramatic, but it hurt. It was closure, simple and quiet. That night he told Laura the truth, not everything, but enough. That he'd felt lost, that he'd forgotten what connection meant. Laura didn't say much. She just looked at him with a mix of pain and understanding. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said. "I just need you to be here." For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight lift. The guilt didn't vanish, but it turned into clarity. He never saw Claire again. Ryan stayed with Sophie for a while, but even that faded eventually. Life moved on. Yet whenever Ethan passed the restaurant where they'd all laughed that first night, he felt something, not regret, but recognition. He had crossed no visible line, but in his heart. He'd learned how close emotions could bring you to the edge. It wasn't a story about betrayal. It was about realization, about how easy it is to drift when you forget to nurture what you already have. And sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the softest moments: a conversation, a glance, a feeling you weren't supposed to have but couldn't ignore. That was the truth Ethan would carry long after the rain stopped falling over Seattle. Autumn came quietly to Seattle. The air grew colder, the sky more gray, and the city lights seemed softer, almost tired. Ethan walked home from work one evening with his hands in his pockets, lost in thought. The streets were full of people rushing somewhere, couples holding hands, friends laughing, strangers with stories he'd never know. But inside him, everything felt still. Since Claire's last message, he hadn't spoken to her again. No calls, no texts, no chance meetings. It was as if she had vanished, leaving behind only memories that refused to fade. Things with Laura had improved on the surface. They had dinners together again, talked more often, even laughed once in a while. But something invisible stood between them. Not anger, not distance, but the quiet knowledge that Ethan's heart had wandered, even if his actions hadn't. He wanted to tell her everything, but couldn't find the right words. How could he explain something that wasn't quite betrayal but didn't feel innocent either? Ryan, meanwhile, had started seeing Sophie less often. The fire that once burned between them had turned into confusion. One afternoon, he called Ethan and said, "You've got time to meet?" They met at their usual spot, a small coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and rain. Ryan looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. "She's great," he said, stirring his drink, "but I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Ethan understood without needing an explanation. They had both been chasing feelings instead of fixing what was broken inside. "You still love your girlfriend?" Ethan asked. Ryan took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I do. I just forgot how to feel it." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what happened to all of us." They sat there in silence, two friends who had seen too much of themselves in the wrong reflections. For years they had shared everything: laughter, dreams, bad decisions. But this was different. This was about what they almost lost, not because of passion, but because of emptiness. That evening, Ethan went home to find Laura cooking. The smell of garlic filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like old times. She smiled when she saw him. "You're home early." He smiled back, setting down his bag. "Yeah, thought I'd help." They cooked together in silence, moving around each other easily. It was simple, ordinary, but for the first time in months, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Maybe healing didn't happen in grand gestures. Maybe it started in moments like these, small, quiet, real. Later that night, he sat on the couch watching the rain against the window. Laura leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're different lately," she said softly. Ethan hesitated. "In a bad way." She shook her head. "No, just quieter. Sad sometimes, but more honest." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm finally figuring things out." She didn't ask what that meant, and he was grateful. Some truths didn't need to be spoken to be understood. A week later, Ethan received an email from Claire. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." His heart skipped. He opened it, and the message was short. "I just wanted to say thank you for the talks, for being kind, and for reminding me that I deserve to feel again. I'm moving back to Chicago next month. Take care of yourself, Ethan. Don't lose what's real." He stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't a goodbye filled with emotion or regret, just calm closure. He didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, but he felt something lift inside him, like a wound that had finally begun to close. Ryan came over that weekend. They grilled on the balcony like they used to, 2 beers on the table, music playing in the background. Ryan looked out at the skyline. "So Claire's gone," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, she moved back home." Ryan took a sip. "Probably for the best." "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "For everyone." It was a long silence. Then Ryan said, "You ever think about how close we came to ruining everything?" Ethan exhaled. "More than I want to admit." Ryan nodded slowly. "You know, it's funny. We didn't even cross the line, but it still feels like we did. 'Cause we thought about it," Ethan said. "And sometimes that's enough to change everything." The two men sat there, watching the city lights shimmer like distant stars. They didn't need to say more. They had both learned what temptation really looked like. Not wild, reckless, or loud, but quiet, gentle, and disguised as understanding. Months passed. Life moved forward. Laura and Ethan took a small trip to the coast. They walked along the beach, the wind cold but refreshing. For the first time in years, they talked about their future, not just the next week or month, but what they truly wanted. "I want to start over," Laura said, holding his hand. "Not forget, not pretend, just start again." Ethan looked at her, realizing how much she still loved him, despite everything. "I want that too," he said, that night. As they watched the waves crash against the shore, Ethan finally understood something. Love wasn't about never being tempted. It was about choosing to stay even when your heart drifted. When they returned to the city, he called Ryan. "How's Sophie?" he asked. Ryan laughed softly. "We ended it. She's great, but we both knew it wasn't meant to last." Ethan nodded. "You okay?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Yeah, for the first time in a while, I actually am." Their friendship grew stronger after that. The mistakes they almost made had turned into lessons, painful but necessary. They learned to talk about their lives without hiding behind jokes or excuses. It was raw, honest friendship, the kind that came from surviving the same storm. One evening, months later, Ethan walked past the Ember Room, the same club where it all began. The signs still glowed red against the night, music spilling out onto the street. He paused for a moment, remembering that first night. The laughter, the conversation, the spark that had started everything. He didn't feel regret anymore, just gratitude. That night had changed him, but not in the way he once feared. It had forced him to look at his own heart, to realize what he was capable of losing if he kept chasing moments instead of meaning as he stood there. He thought about Claire. He hoped she was happy, maybe in another city, maybe with someone who understood her silences. He didn't love her, not really. What he loved was how she made him remember who he was before life became routine. And for that, he was thankful. He walked home under the streetlights, the sound of music fading behind him. When he opened the door, Laura was there, waiting with a smile. "You're late," she teased. "Just took the long way home," he said. She handed him a mug of tea. "Still thinking too much." He laughed, a little less every day. They sat together on the couch, no words needed. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, steady, familiar. Ethan looked at her and realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't survive because it's easy. It survives because people choose to stay, to rebuild, to forgive. Later that night, lying beside Laura, Ethan thought about everything that had happened the night at the club. The connection with Claire, the silence that followed, and the quiet redemption that came after. Life, he realized, wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning which ones were worth never repeating. Somewhere across the city, Ryan was probably sitting by his window, thinking the same thing. They had both walked close to the edge and come back wiser. Not perfect, not pure, but aware. And maybe that was enough. Ethan closed his eyes as the sound of rain deepened. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he finally understood himself. He had learned that temptation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and the real strength lies not in resisting it once, but in recognizing it before it begins. In the end, love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic promises. It was about quiet moments, two people choosing each other again and again, even after they've seen how easily things can break. And as the night faded into dawn, Ethan knew one truth he would never forget. Sometimes the hardest part of love isn't staying faithful to someone else. It's staying faithful to who you are. Emma Parker had always believed that peace came from control. After her divorce, she built her life around calm routines that left no room for surprises. Her mornings began with the same walk through her quiet Portland neighborhood, coffee in hand, earphones playing soft jazz. Her evenings were quiet, a book, a candle, and the sound of rain outside her apartment window. She liked that nothing unexpected happened anymore. It made her feel safe. Her marriage had ended 3 years ago, not in a storm of anger, but in silence, the kind that grows when love fades. Her ex-husband, Mark, had moved across the country, remarried, and seemed happy. Emma told everyone she was happy too, and for the most part, it was true. She liked her independence, her small marketing job, her 2 close friends who made sure she laughed sometimes. She had learned to be enough for herself. But sometimes, when she caught couples laughing in cafes or saw people holding hands in the rain, a quiet ache stirred in her chest. It wasn't about Mark. That chapter was closed. It was about connection. That unexplainable spark that makes you feel alive again. Still, she pushed that thought away. She had made herself a promise the night she signed her divorce papers. No more risks, no more heartbreak. So when her friend Lily invited her to a company networking event one Friday evening, Emma hesitated. "You know, those things aren't for me," she said. But Lily laughed and said, "You've been single for too long, Em. Go out, meet people, even if it's just for a drink and some bad appetizers." Emma almost said no. She didn't want to stand around pretending to enjoy small talk. But a small voice inside whispered, maybe one night out won't hurt. So she went. The event was held in a downtown hotel lounge, warm lighting, light music, and too many people trying to sound more important than they were. Emma stood near the corner, holding a glass of sparkling water, counting the minutes before she could politely leave. That's when she heard someone say, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She turned and met a pair of calm, dark eyes. The man standing before her had an easy presence, confident, but not in a loud way. He smiled, a little amused, like he'd caught her secret. "Am I that obvious?" she asked, trying not to laugh. "A little," he said. "But you're not alone. I'm Daniel." He offered his hand, and she shook it. He wasn't dressed like the others, no fancy suit, no flashy tie. Just a simple jacket, rolled sleeves, a camera hanging around his neck. "You're not with the company?" she asked. "No," he said. "I was hired to photograph the event. But honestly, I'm just here for the stories. People are fascinating when they pretend to be confident." She smiled. "And what story do you think I'm pretending to tell?" He tilted his head thoughtfully. "You don't look like you're pretending. You look like someone who's good at being alone, but maybe tired of it." His words caught her off guard. She wanted to say something clever, but instead, she just stared at him, unsure why a stranger's observation felt so personal. They ended up talking for hours about her work, travels, books they both loved, and how both of them found comfort in rainy days. Daniel told her he was a freelance photographer, mostly doing travel and lifestyle projects. He had lived in Seattle for years, but was in Portland for a short assignment. "I've been everywhere," he said, "but I'm still trying to figure out where I belong." Something about the way he said it, open, honest, slightly sad, made her chest tighten. It had been a long time since someone spoke to her without pretending to have everything figured out. When the event ended, most people left in pairs or groups. Emma and Daniel were still talking, sitting near the window, watching the rain outside. She didn't want the night to end, but she didn't know why. "I should go," she said finally. "Can I walk you out?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The air smelled fresh, clean. They walked slowly toward her car, the street quiet around them. "I'm glad I came tonight," she said softly. "Me too," he replied. "Maybe you'll let me buy you a coffee before I leave town." Emma smiled, unsure whether she should say yes. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe is good," he answered with that same calm smile. "I can work with maybe." She laughed, then got into her car. As she drove home, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. It wasn't love. She knew better than that, but it was something. That night, as she sat by her window, she tried to focus on her book, but couldn't. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel, his voice, the way he listened, how he seemed genuinely curious about her life. It felt strange. She barely knew him, but it felt like he had seen through her walls without trying. She reminded herself of her rules. No emotional risks, no attachment. No getting close to anyone who might complicate her peace. She repeated those words like a prayer before bed. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his smile again, and that calm voice saying, "You look like someone who's good at being alone, but tired of it." The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in soft fog. She made coffee and sat at her table, still thinking about him. She didn't like how easily her thoughts had wandered, how quickly her calm life had shifted. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She had built her days around predictability, and now a single evening had unsettled all of it. Later that week, an email popped up from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Coffee for the maybe." It was from Daniel. Her heart skipped a beat before she even opened it. The message was simple: a coffee shop name, a day, a time, and a smiley face. No pressure, no expectation. She stared at the email for a long time. Lily, seeing the look on her face at work, leaned over and said, "What's that smile about?" "It's nothing," Emma said quickly. "Nothing doesn't make you blush," Lily teased. Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. "It's just someone I met at the event." "He's different? Different good or different dangerous?" "I'm not sure yet," Emma admitted. That evening, she drafted 3 different replies and deleted them all. She didn't know why she was nervous. It was just coffee. Still, she felt as though replying would mean breaking some invisible line she had drawn years ago. A line that said she was done with this kind of thing. But curiosity is a quiet force. It whispers when logic is loud. And Emma's curiosity was louder than her rules that night. So she finally typed back, "Maybe coffee sounds nice." The moment she hit send, she felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. It wasn't about Daniel, not really. It was about herself, the part she thought was gone, the part that still wanted to feel something real. That night she stood by the window again, rain falling softly outside, the city lights flickering like small promises. She didn't know where this was going, and that uncertainty should have scared her. But it didn't. For the first time in years, Emma Parker didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt alive. She didn't realize it yet, but that single choice, replying to his email, would change everything. It would test every rule she'd ever made, and every wall she thought would keep her heart safe. And somewhere deep down, she already knew it. Because sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just begins again when you least expect it. The cafe Daniel chose was small and quiet, hidden between 2 old bookstores in downtown Portland. Emma almost canceled 3 times that morning. She told herself she was too busy, that she didn't need this kind of distraction. But curiosity won. By the time she walked through the cafe door, Daniel was already there, camera on the table, coffee in hand, smiling like he'd been waiting for her all day. "You came," he said softly. "Standing up, barely," she admitted, laughing. "I almost changed my mind. Then I'm glad you didn't." From the moment she sat down, it was easy, too easy. They talked about work, travel, favorite cities, little memories that didn't seem to matter but somehow did. Daniel had a way of making everything feel personal. He didn't talk to fill silence. He talked to connect. When she mentioned how she liked the sound of rain, he said, "That's funny. I chase sunlight for photos, but I like rain when I'm home. It slows life down." 2 hours passed before she realized it. When they finally stood to leave, he said, "I don't know when I'll get another day like this. Can we do it again?" Emma hesitated. She could already feel the pull, the quiet danger beneath their easy laughter. But she nodded anyway. "Sure, just as friends," she added quickly. He smiled, not mocking, just knowing. Of course. Their coffee as friends became a pattern. Once a week at first, then twice. They found new cafes, walked along the riverfront, explored weekend art shows. They texted about random things, music, recipes, books, and sometimes nothing at all. Each message felt like a thread pulling them closer. Daniel told her about his travels, how photography wasn't just his job. It was how he tried to understand people. Everyone's story looks different when you look close enough, he said one day as he showed her pictures from Iceland. Sometimes you think you're capturing a place, but you're actually capturing how it made you feel. Emma liked listening to him. He spoke with quiet passion. And that stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. She found herself checking her phone too often, waiting for his messages. She told herself it was harmless. But deep down she knew this wasn't friendship anymore. One rainy evening, Daniel called her and said, "Come out. The city looks too beautiful to waste indoors." Against her better judgment, she went. They walked by the river, the lights reflecting on wet pavement. The smell of rain and coffee filled the air. "You always seem calm," he said suddenly. "Even when you talk about sad things. How do you do that?" Emma smiled faintly. "You learn to stay calm when you've already been through storms." He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "I think you hide behind calm. You use it like a wall." She wanted to protest, but he was right. She had spent years keeping her emotions locked away, believing that was strength. Now, standing beside him, she wasn't sure what strength meant anymore. After that night, things changed. Their meetings grew longer. They shared deeper conversations about love, loneliness, regrets. Daniel confessed that his relationship with someone back home was complicated. "We've been on and off for years," he said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like home, sometimes it feels like a cage." Emma froze. She hadn't known. He wasn't married, but he wasn't entirely free either. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want this to feel wrong," he said. She wanted to walk away right then to protect herself. But when she looked at him, the honesty in his eyes, the sadness behind his smile, she couldn't. She told herself she understood. She told herself it was just friendship still. But every time they met, her heart betrayed her. They started seeing each other more after work. Before his trips, during short breaks between projects, he'd bring her small things, a photo, a flower, a note scribbled on a napkin. "For when I'm gone," he'd say. Each gift was simple but meaningful. Emma tried to keep distance, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. At night, she'd catch herself smiling at nothing, replaying their conversations. Then guilt would hit her like a wave. She didn't want to be the reason someone else's relationship failed. But what they had didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like something that had found her when she wasn't looking. One weekend, Daniel invited her to a photography exhibition where his work was featured. The gallery was filled with soft lights and quiet music. Emma walked through the room, looking at the photos, cities' faces, moments frozen in time. One picture caught her attention. A woman standing by a rainy window, looking out. "That one's my favorite," Daniel said behind her. "It's not about sadness. It's about longing for something you don't understand yet." She turned to him, and their eyes met. For a second, the room faded. It was just them, the air thick with unspoken feelings. They didn't touch, didn't say anything. But in that silence, everything between them became clear. She was falling for him, and it wasn't something she could stop. After the exhibition, they walked outside into the cool night air. Daniel looked at her and said, "You know, this isn't simple." "No," she whispered. "Then why do we keep doing this?" She didn't have an answer. Maybe because it felt too right to stop. Maybe because, for once, she felt seen, alive, real. That night she sat by her window again, staring at the city lights. She couldn't deny it anymore. She cared about him. But every part of her knew it couldn't last. He would leave soon. His life was somewhere else. And yet the thought of not seeing him again hurt more than she expected. The next few weeks blurred by. Daniel's project was ending, and his departure date grew closer. Emma tried to act normal, but everything felt heavier. One afternoon, he stopped by her office. "I just wanted to see you before I go," he said. She followed him outside. The city felt different that day, quieter, as if holding its breath. "Where will you go next?" she asked. "Maybe back home," he said, not sounding convinced. "Maybe somewhere new. I don't know anymore." They stood there, neither knowing what to say. Then Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small printed photo. It was the cafe where they had met for the first time, sunlight spilling through the window. "I took this the day you walked in," he said. "You were smiling at something the barista said. I wanted to remember that moment." Emma stared at the photo, speechless. Why would you want to remember me? Because you reminded me that not everything real has to last forever to matter. Her throat tightened. That sounds like goodbye. It might be, he said softly. But I hope it's not the end. She couldn't speak. The part of her that lived by rules wanted to tell him to go, to leave before they both got hurt. But her heart, fragile, stubborn, wanted him to stay, even if it meant pain later. That evening, she didn't go home right away. She walked by the river where they'd walked before. The city lights danced on the water. And she thought about everything, her promises, her fears, and how one person had changed the rhythm of her quiet life. For years, she had believed that peace meant safety. Now, she was learning that sometimes peace comes after chaos, when you finally let yourself feel again. When she got home, she placed the photo Daniel gave her on her bookshelf. She didn't cry, but she couldn't sleep either. She knew what was happening between them couldn't last. But she also knew she would never forget it, because some people don't stay forever. They arrive to remind you that you're still capable of warmth, still capable of feeling deeply even when you've promised yourself not to. And as she lay there in the dark, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel lit up the screen. "I'll see you before I go. Just once more." She stared at it, her heart caught between fear and desire. She didn't know what she would say when that moment came, but she knew she would go because some goodbyes are too heavy to say over text. And some stories, no matter how forbidden, need their ending to be spoken face to face. The day Daniel was supposed to leave, Portland felt colder than usual. Clouds hung low, the city wrapped in gray light. Emma hadn't replied to his last message for 2 days. She didn't know what to say. Every time she picked up her phone, words failed her. What could she tell him? That she didn't want him to go. That she was afraid of what she'd feel if she saw him again. That she had already broken every rule she ever made for herself. By noon, she had convinced herself to stay home. She told herself that not saying goodbye was easier, cleaner. But when evening came, the silence in her apartment grew unbearable. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, felt too loud, too empty. Finally, she grabbed her coat and keys. Her heart was pounding as if it already knew she was about to lose something she didn't even have. She found him at the riverfront, the same place they had walked so many times before. He was sitting on a bench, camera resting beside him, watching the water move slowly under the bridge lights. When he saw her, his face softened, relief washing over his features. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't," she replied. "I figured." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with everything they hadn't said. Finally, Emma asked, "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning." Words hit harder than she expected. "And then what?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm supposed to go back to Seattle, maybe fix things. Or maybe not. I haven't decided." She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. The honesty in his voice made it harder, not easier. Daniel turned to her, his eyes steady. "I don't want to hurt anyone, Emma. Not you, not her. But these last few months, they've meant something to me." She looked down at her hands. "You made me break my own peace," she said softly. "I spent years building walls, convincing myself I was fine alone. Then you showed up and everything changed." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her hand. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." His touch wasn't bold. It was uncertain, like he was afraid she'd pull away. She didn't. They sat there in silence, hand in hand, both knowing it couldn't last. The city lights shimmered on the water, the air smelled of rain. And time seemed to slow down just long enough for her to feel the ache of wanting something she couldn't keep. After a while, he said if this were a different time, maybe. She cut him off gently. "But it's not. And that's what makes it real. We met when we weren't supposed to, but it still mattered." He looked at her then, really looked. And in his eyes, she saw everything. The affection, the regret. It's a quiet acceptance that some stories are beautiful precisely because they end too soon. When he finally stood up, she followed. They walked side by side down the empty street, their hands brushing but never fully holding. The silence was heavy but not painful, more like an understanding at her car. They stopped. "Will you write to me?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "I don't think I should," he said softly. "If I do, we'll never let go." She nodded, tears burning at the back of her eyes. "Then don't." He smiled sadly. "You're stronger than you think, Emma. I don't feel like it." "Ha," he said again. For a second, the world went still. Then, before she could think, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a desperate hug. It was slow, quiet, full of all the things they never said out loud. He held her back, his chin resting gently on her head. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. When they finally pulled away, she whispered, "Goodbye, Daniel." He looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Emma." Ah. And then he was gone. She stood there long after his car disappeared from sight, the cold air pressing against her skin. It felt like standing at the edge of something she couldn't see. Loss and relief tangled together. She got into her car, drove home, and cried for the first time in years. Not because she'd been betrayed, but because she had felt something real and had to let it go. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Emma sat by her window with a cup of coffee, watching the light spill across the buildings. Everything looked the same, yet different. Her life, once quiet and carefully controlled, now felt too large, too full of emotions she didn't know how to name. Over the next few weeks, she tried to return to her routines, work, errands. Quiet evenings, but Daniel's presence lingered in small ways. She'd see someone taking photos downtown and feel her chest tighten. She'd dip past the cafe they used to visit and have to look away. She even tried deleting his messages once, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Then, one afternoon, she received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just her name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a small photograph. It was of her standing by the window of that cafe, sunlight falling across her face. At the bottom he had written, "To the woman who reminded me what honesty feels like." She didn't cry this time. She smiled instead, a soft, sad smile that came from understanding. He hadn't written to reopen anything. It was a thank you, a goodbye that didn't need words. That night, Emma placed the photo next to the one he had given her before. She realized she wasn't angry or broken. She was grateful. Love hadn't returned the way she expected. It hadn't come with promises or forever. It had come like rain, brief, cleansing, and gone before she could hold on to it. But it had washed away the dust from her heart. The fear that had kept her from living fully in the months that followed, Emma found herself changing. She began saying yes to more things, joining a local photography class, going out with friends more often, even traveling on her own. She no longer lived in fear of feeling too much. She had learned that pain wasn't something to hide from. It was proof that she was still capable of love. Sometimes she'd walk by the river where they last met, and memories would come back. His laughter, his calm voice, that last embrace. But it no longer hurt the same way. It was a memory she carried gently. Like a favorite song she no longer played often, but still remembered every word of. One evening, while walking home, she saw a young couple standing by the bridge, laughing under the rain. They reminded her of how it had all started. A simple meeting, a shared smile, and everything that followed. She smiled to herself, realizing that every person who walks into your life leaves something behind. Some teach you to love. Others teach you to let go. Daniel had done both later that night. She sat by her window, her favorite spot, watching the city lights shimmer. The air was cool and the sound of rain filled the room. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "I was curious. And he made me forget every rule I ever set for myself." But she didn't regret it. Not one moment. Because sometimes life's most beautiful lessons come disguised as mistakes. And sometimes love, even when it's not meant to last, is still worth every heartbeat it costs. Months later, Emma received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "I saw rain in your city again." There was no name, no message, just a photograph attached. It showed Portland's skyline at dusk, the same river glistening under the bridge lights. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She smiled, saved the photo, and whispered softly, "Good luck, Daniel." Then she closed her laptop, made a cup of tea, and let the rain fall outside, calm, steady, endless. For the first time in years, Emma Parker wasn't haunted by what could have been. She was at peace with what had been and ready for whatever might come next.